Have you ever looked at the person you vowed to spend your life with and realized in a single heart-stopping moment you are actually looking at a complete stranger who hates you? I stood in a freezing gas station parking lot in Billings, Montana, watching the taillights of my wife's car fade into the distance. She wasn't coming back. Her sisters were in the back seat, laughing their heads off as they peeled onto the highway, leaving me stranded with nothing but my wallet and a dying phone battery. They called it a prank. They said they were teaching me a lesson about independence. But as the cold wind started to cut through my jacket, I realized this wasn't a joke. It was the end of my life as I knew it, and the beginning of a nightmare they never saw coming. Figure it out yourself! That was the last thing my wife, Stephanie, yelled at me before she slammed her foot on the gas. The engine roared, a sound that usually meant we were going somewhere together, but this time it was the sound of my marriage driving away. I stood there frozen, not just from the biting October chill, but from the sheer shock of what was happening. I watched her sedan tear out of that gas station parking lot in Billings, Montana, creating a cloud of dust. Through the rear window, I could see two silhouettes, her sisters, Jessica and Vanessa. They were bouncing in their seats, heads thrown back, laughing. They were laughing like it was the funniest thing they had ever seen in their entire lives. My name is John. I'm 34 years old. I work construction for North Peak Engineering, and up until 5 minutes ago, I had been married to Stephanie for 8 years. We had driven up here for her cousin's wedding. It was supposed to be a nice weekend getaway, just the four of us and her sedan, splitting gas money and hotel rooms to save a few bucks. But the entire ride up from Denver, something felt off. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and everyone stops talking? That was the vibe in the car for 200 miles. Stephanie kept exchanging these weird, heavy looks with her sisters in the rearview mirror. I'd see their eyes meet in the reflection, followed by little smirks or whispered conversations whenever the music got loud or they thought I was dozing off. When I asked what was going on, Stephanie would just flash that bright, synthetic smile and say, "Nothing, babe, just sister stuff. You wouldn't get it." I should have trusted my gut. I should have known that sister stuff was code for something malicious. We had stopped for gas about an hour outside of Billings. I went inside to grab a coffee and use the restroom, standard pit stop stuff. I was gone maybe 5 minutes. When I came out, wiping my hands on my jeans, they were already in the car. The engine was running, the reverse lights were on. Stephanie rolled down the passenger window with this weird, twisted grin on her face. It wasn't a loving smile. It was the face of someone anticipating a crash. "Get in the car, Stephanie," I said, walking toward the passenger door, reaching for the handle. "Actually," she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness, "we've been talking, and we think you need to learn some independence." I froze, hand hovering over the door handle. "What are you talking about?" Jessica leaned forward from the back seat, her face squeezed between the front seats. "You're always so clingy, John. You follow Stephanie around like a lost puppy. It's pathetic." "We thought this would be good for you," Vanessa chimed in from the other side, looking at her nails like she was bored. "A little adventure. Man up." I stood there, car keys in my hand, except I realized with a jolt of panic they weren't car keys. They were my house keys. My truck was back home in Denver, parked safely in our driveway because they insisted we take one car. "This isn't funny," I said. My voice dropped an octave. "Whatever joke this is, cut it out. Open the door." Stephanie's smile got wider, almost manic. "It's not a joke. It's a prank. You're always so serious, John. Learn to laugh a little." And then she screamed it. "Figure it out yourself." She hit the gas. I literally had to jump back to avoid the tires running over my toes. I watched their taillights disappear down Highway 2, standing there with my wallet, my phone, and a growing realization that my wife and her sisters had just abandoned me in the middle of nowhere. The October wind in Montana is no joke. It cut right through my light jacket, and I could smell snow coming on the breeze. The sky was turning that bruised purple color it gets before a storm. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling slightly. I called Stephanie's phone, straight to voicemail. I called Jessica's number, voicemail. I tried Vanessa, but the call failed immediately. She had blocked my number months ago after some stupid argument about a restaurant bill that I couldn't even remember. That's when I knew. This wasn't some stupid drive around the block and come back laughing prank. This wasn't something that would end in an hour with a gotcha moment. This was something else entirely. This was malicious. This was something that showed me exactly what my wife and her sisters thought of me. I wasn't a husband or a brother-in-law to them. I was a prop. I was a joke. I walked back into the gas station, the bell on the door jingling cheerfully, mocking my mood. I asked the clerk, an older guy with grease stains on his shirt, how much a bus ticket to Denver cost. He looked at me over his glasses. He said, "No buses run through here, son." He shook his head. "Greyhound stops in Billings. That's about 40 miles east." 40 miles.
I'd met Stephanie 9 years earlier at a job site. She was doing environmental consulting for a commercial project my crew was working on. She was smart, funny, and she had this incredible way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room when she talked to me. I fell hard. But her sisters, they were different from day one. Jessica was 2 years older, worked in marketing for some tech company, and always had opinions about everything, especially things she knew nothing about. Vanessa was the baby, 28 years old, still figuring out what she wanted to do with her life, but never short on attitude or audacity. From the beginning, they treated me like I was an intruder, like I was taking their sister away from the coven. Family dinners were a nightmare. They'd make inside jokes I couldn't follow, whispering and giggling while I sat there chewing my steak in silence. Vacations were worse. They'd book activities for just the girls without asking if I wanted to join, leaving me sitting in the hotel room. Small things. Just small things that added up over time, like layers of sediment hardening into rock. "They're just protective," Stephanie would say whenever I brought it up, brushing my concerns away like lint on a jacket. "They'll warm up to you. Give it time." But they never did. If anything, they got worse after we got married. Jessica started making comments about how I held Stephanie back from traveling more, from taking risks. "He's so safe," she'd say with a sneer. Vanessa would roll her eyes whenever I offered to help with anything, like changing a tire or fixing a leaky faucet in their apartments. "Not everything needs a man to solve it," she'd say, snapping at me for trying to be helpful. I started noticing other things, too. How Stephanie would text constantly when we were together, always with her sisters. How she'd change our plans at the last minute because Jessica or Vanessa had some crisis that needed immediate attention. Last year, Stephanie forgot our anniversary because she was helping Vanessa move apartments. The year before that, she missed my birthday dinner because Jessica was having drama with her boyfriend. "Family comes first," she'd always say. And I got that. I respected it. But wasn't I family too? The warning signs were there during the drive to Montana, flashing like neon lights I refused to read. How they'd insisted I didn't need to bring my truck because we'd all ride together. How Stephanie had booked the hotel room under her name only. How Jessica kept making jokes about how I never did anything spontaneous. Remember when you used to be fun, before you got all domestic and boring? I laughed it off, but it stung. I worked 60-hour weeks to keep us comfortable. I fixed things around the house, planned vacations, remembered important dates. I thought that was what being a good husband meant. Standing in that gas station parking lot watching the sunset bleed over the Montana hills, I realized I'd been wrong. Not about being a good husband, but about who I was married to. The clerk inside took pity on me and let me use the station's landline to call a taxi company in Billings. It was a $60 ride I couldn't really afford to throw away, but I needed to get to that bus station. The bus ride to Denver took 14 hours. 14 hours to sit in that uncomfortable gray fabric seat, smelling the chemical toilet at the back of the bus, and think about my marriage. I had 14 hours to replay every argument, every weird look, every time I felt small in my own home. I kept checking my phone, expecting an apology text, maybe a panicked call when they realized they'd gone too far. "Oh my God, John, turn your phone on, we're coming back." That's what I wanted to see, but nothing came. The screen stayed black. Around midnight, somewhere outside Casper, Wyoming, the truth hit me like a physical punch to the gut. This wasn't about teaching me independence. This wasn't about helping me loosen up. This was about humiliation. This was about showing me exactly where I stood in their little sisterhood hierarchy. I was the outsider. I was the target. I thought about all the times I'd given in when they wanted to change our plans, all the times I'd bitten my tongue when they made jokes at my expense, all the times I apologized for things that weren't my fault just to keep the peace. The worst part wasn't being abandoned. The worst part was realizing this was probably something they'd planned for weeks, maybe months. Sitting around Jessica's apartment, drinking wine, cooking up this scheme, laughing about how clueless I was. "He'll never see it coming," they probably said. By the time the bus pulled into Denver at 8 a.m., the sun was rising over the city, and I had made my decision. The sadness was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, hard clarity.
I took a cab home, expecting to find Stephanie's car in the driveway, expecting a confrontation, but it wasn't there. The house was empty, exactly like we'd left it Friday morning. The silence in the house was deafening. It felt like a museum of a life that didn't exist anymore. I sat at the kitchen table and called in sick to work. Then I did something I'd never done before. I started going through Stephanie's things. Not because I was jealous or suspicious in the cheating sense, but because I needed to understand who I'd been sleeping next to for 8 years. Her laptop was on the desk. It was password protected, but she'd always been careless about closing browser tabs. When I opened it, her web WhatsApp was still logged in. I found group chats between her and her sisters going back months. I scrolled, and my stomach turned. Screenshots of our text conversations that she'd shared with them, complete with laughing emojis. Photos of me sleeping on the couch that she'd sent them with captions like "dead to the world as usual" and "zero awareness." But it was the thread about the Montana trip that broke something inside me forever. Jessica had suggested it first. We should totally ditch him somewhere and see how long it takes him to figure out how to get home. Vanessa replied, "OMG, yes! He's so dependent on Steph for everything. It would be epic." Stephanie, "You guys are terrible, but also it would be hilarious." They'd planned every detail. The gas station stop, the specific script about needing independence, even the backup plan. Jessica had written, "If I somehow made it home before them, he'll probably just call his mom or something. Big baby." Big baby. I closed the laptop and sat there for a long time. The house creaked in the wind. I looked at the photos on the wall. Our wedding day, a trip to the beach, a Christmas party. They looked like lies now. Then I went upstairs, packed a bag, and left. I didn't leave a note. I didn't turn off the utilities or lock the door. I just walked out the same way they'd driven away from me. The difference was, I wasn't coming back. I drove my truck to my brother Kevin's place in Colorado Springs. He worked nights at a manufacturing plant and had a spare room in his apartment. When I showed up at his door with a duffel bag and no explanation, he just nodded and handed me a beer. That's brotherhood. "How long you staying?" he asked, leaning against the door frame. "Don't know yet." Kevin had never liked Stephanie. He'd never said it outright, but I could tell by the way he'd get quiet when she was around, how he'd always have some excuse to leave early when we had family gatherings. I told him what happened, all of it. The prank, the group chats, the months of planning behind my back. "Jesus, John," he said, crushing his empty beer can. "You're better off without her. That's sociopathic." Monday morning, I called my supervisor at North Peak and requested a transfer to a project in Colorado Springs. We'd been short-handed on a hospital renovation down there, and they needed experienced guys. My boss didn't ask questions, just said I could start Wednesday. Tuesday afternoon, my phone started ringing. Stephanie was back. I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened to the message. "John, where are you? I came home, and you're just gone. That's not like you. Call me back. We need to talk about this." No apology. No acknowledgement of what she'd done. Just confusion that I'd had the nerve to disappear on her. She sounded annoyed, not sorry. I blocked her number. An hour later, Jessica called. I blocked her too. Then Vanessa. Blocked. But they were clever. They started calling from other numbers, Stephanie's work phone, numbers I didn't recognize. Always the same message. I was overreacting. It was just a joke. I needed to come home so we could work this out. Thursday, Kevin came home from his shift with a weird look on his face. "Your wife's here," he said. "She's sitting in her car outside." I looked out the window. There was Stephanie's sedan parked across the street. She saw me in the window and got out, walking towards the apartment building with a determined stride.
I met her in the lobby before she could knock on Kevin's door. I didn't want her in my safe space. "John, thank God," she said, reaching for me, trying to hug me. "I've been so worried." I stepped back, dodging her touch like she was contagious. "What do you want, Stephanie?" "I want you to come home. I want us to talk about this like adults." "Talk about what?" I snapped. "How you abandoned me 200 miles from home? How you and your sisters planned it for months?" Her face changed instantly. The concerned wife act dropped for just a second, and I saw something else underneath. Irritation, like I was being a toddler who wouldn't eat his peas. "It was a prank, John. You're acting like we committed a crime. God, you have no sense of humor. I left you stranded. You laughed about it. You planned it for months." "Because you needed it," she yelled, her voice echoing in the small lobby. And there it was, the real reason. "You're so dependent, so clingy. We thought if you had to figure something out on your own for once, maybe you'd grow up a little." The lobby was quiet, except for the fluorescent lights humming overhead. I looked at this woman I'd been married to for 8 years and realized I didn't know her at all. The cruelty was casual to her. "I'm not coming home," I said calmly. "Don't be ridiculous. You can't just disappear because your feelings got hurt. Watch me." I turned and walked back to the elevator. She followed, talking faster now, making promises, threats, explanations that didn't make sense. But I stopped listening. When the elevator doors closed, she was still talking, her face red with anger. Friday morning, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Jessica. Stephanie's really upset. You need to fix this." I showed it to Kevin over coffee. "Change your number," he said. So I did. 3 weeks later, I was settling into my new routine. Work at the hospital site during the day, helping Kevin with his truck on weekends, learning what it felt like to make decisions without checking with someone first. I'd found a small apartment on the south side of Colorado Springs. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. No shared decisions about furniture or paint colors. No compromise on which shows to watch or what to have for dinner. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. That's when my mother called. "John, honey, Stephanie came by the house." I'd been avoiding my parents' calls, not ready to explain the separation yet, but apparently Stephanie had no such hesitation. "What did she tell you?" I asked, gripping the phone. She said you're having some kind of breakdown, that you disappeared after a family trip and wouldn't answer her calls." I could hear the worry in my mother's voice. Mom had always liked Stephanie. She thought she was good for me, stable, responsible. She had no idea. "It's not a breakdown, Mom. We're having problems." "What kind of problems that can't be worked out?" I didn't want to get into details. I didn't want to explain the group chats or the planning or the months of subtle cruelty that had led up to that moment in Montana. It would sound petty, like I was overreacting to a joke. "I'll call you later, Mom. I need to think about some things." But after I hung up, I realized Stephanie was still playing the game. She was controlling the narrative, making me look like the unstable one, the one who'd abandoned his marriage over nothing. I drove back to Denver that weekend, not to the house Stephanie and I had shared, but to Marcus's place. He worked construction too. He had been at my wedding. "Heard you and Stephanie split up," he said when I showed up at his door. "Sorry, man." "What did you hear?" "Just that you took off after some fight. She seemed pretty torn up about it." There it was again, Stephanie's version of events. Marcus offered me a beer and we sat on his back porch. I told him the real story, all of it. "That's messed up," he said, staring at the ground. "Why would she do something like that?" "I think she wanted me gone, not permanently, but I think she liked having the power to hurt me, to show me how little I mattered."
Marcus was quiet for a while. Then he looked up. "You know what I remember about your wedding?" I shook my head. "During the reception, you were talking to some of my crew guys. Just normal conversation, laughing, having a beer. But every time you'd laugh or it seemed like you were enjoying yourself, Stephanie would come over and interrupt. She'd find some reason you needed to be somewhere else. 'Oh, come say hi to Aunt Linda,' or 'we need a photo.' I thought she was just being a good hostess. But now, maybe she just didn't like seeing you happy without her." That hit home. That night, I drove past the house where Stephanie and I had lived. Her car was in the driveway, lights on in the living room. I could see her shadow moving around inside. I didn't stop. I just drove past and kept going. But seeing that house, remembering the life I'd built there, made me realize something important. I wasn't just running away from a bad marriage. I was running towards something better. Over the next few months, I started taking steps I should have taken years ago. I opened my own bank account, transferred my half of our savings, and found a lawyer who specialized in divorce cases. The lawyer, a straightforward woman named Patricia Coleman, listened to my story without judgment. "Do you have documentation of the harassment?" she asked. I showed her the blocked numbers on my phone, the messages from Jessica and Vanessa, the way they'd been calling my workplace. "And you said she went to your parents' house?" "Yeah, told them I was having a breakdown." Patricia made notes on her legal pad. "We can work with this. Colorado is a no-fault divorce state, but the harassment could be relevant for other purposes." I signed the papers that afternoon. Patricia would handle serving Stephanie and starting the proceedings. "One more thing," she said as I was leaving. "Don't engage with any contact attempts. Don't respond to calls, texts, or in-person visits. Anything you say can be used to paint you as unstable or vindictive." The hospital renovation project was going well. I'd been promoted to crew leader, supervising a team of 5 guys. I started taking evening classes at the community college, business management. It was something I'd always been interested in, but never had time for when Stephanie and her sisters were constantly demanding attention. 2 months after I'd filed for divorce, Kevin called me at work. "That lawyer of yours wants to talk to you, says it's important." I met Patricia at her office that afternoon.
She had a stack of papers on her desk and a satisfied look on her face. "Your wife's been busy. She hired her own attorney, and they're trying to claim abandonment. Says you left without warning and refuses to participate in marriage counseling." "Abandonment?" I scoffed. "It's a stretch, but they're arguing that your leaving was deliberate and vindictive. They want to contest the division of assets. But here's the interesting part," Patricia continued, leaning forward. "I had an investigator do some digging. Your wife's been telling people that you became abusive and she had to escape for her safety." My blood ran cold. "That's a lie, a massive lie." "I know, and I can prove it. The investigator found social media posts from the weekend you were abandoned. Photos of your wife and her sisters celebrating at some bar in Billings, captions about Girls' Weekend and freedom. She showed me printouts of Instagram posts. Stephanie and her sisters raising shot glasses, huge smiles, posted at 11 p.m. the same day they'd left me at that gas station." "This destroys their narrative," Patricia said. "They can't claim they were afraid of you while simultaneously celebrating your absence." I stared at the photos. In one of them, Jessica was wearing my Denver Broncos cap, the one I had left in the car when I went into the gas station. They were literally wearing my clothes while celebrating stranding me. "There's more," Patricia said. "The investigator also found the group chat messages. Your wife was careless about her privacy settings." She handed me another stack of papers, screenshots of the conversations I'd seen on Stephanie's laptop, plus dozens more I hadn't found. Months of planning, laughing about my potential reactions, making bets about how long it would take me to crawl back home. "We file our response tomorrow, and then we end this." The divorce hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in March. I wore my best suit, the one I'd gotten married in 8 years earlier. Stephanie sat at the other table with her attorney, a sharp-dressed man who looked like he charged by the hour. She'd lost weight, looked tired. When our eyes met across the courtroom, she tried to smile like we were still on the same team. It was pathetic. Her attorney went first, painting me as an unstable husband who'd abandoned his wife after a minor disagreement. He said I disappeared without warning, refused counseling, and was trying to punish Stephanie for a harmless prank. "Your Honor, Mr. John Thompson was clearly looking for an excuse to leave his marriage. He used a simple misunderstanding between family members as justification for abandoning his responsibilities." Patricia stood up when it was our turn. She was calm, professional, and absolutely deadly. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence that contradicts the petitioner's claims." She handed the judge the stack of screenshots, the social media posts, the documented harassment. Piece by piece, she dismantled Stephanie's story. "These are text messages between the petitioner and her sisters planning what they call a prank for months in advance. Here are social media posts from the night they abandoned my client, celebrating their actions. And here are records of continued harassment after my client requested no contact." The judge reviewed the documents in silence. The room was so quiet, you could hear the HVAC humming. Stephanie's attorney whispered urgently to her, and I could see the panic rising in her face. "Furthermore," Patricia continued, "the petitioner has been spreading false claims about my client's mental state and character to mutual friends and family members. This is a pattern of manipulation and emotional abuse, not the actions of a concerned spouse." When the judge finally looked up, his expression was neutral, but firm. "Based on the evidence presented, I'm granting the divorce as requested. Assets will be divided equally with no spousal support awarded to either party. The court finds no evidence of abandonment or abuse by the respondent." The gavel came down.
Stephanie tried to approach me in the courthouse hallway, tears in her eyes. But Patricia stepped between us like a bodyguard. "No contact," she said firmly. "The order is still in effect." I walked to my truck without looking back. 3 years after that gas station in Montana, it was finally over. The business management courses paid off. 6 months later, I started my own construction company, Thompson Contracting. Small jobs at first, bathroom innovations, deck repairs, but the work was steady, and the customers appreciated having someone who showed up on time and did what he promised. Kevin became my first employee. Then Marcus joined us when word got around that we were honest contractors who didn't cut corners. I bought a small house on the west side of Colorado Springs. Nothing fancy, but it had a garage for my tools and a yard where I could think. No shared decisions, no committee meetings about paint colors. About a year after the divorce was final, I ran into Marcus at the hardware store. "You hear about Stephanie?" he asked, examining the box of nails. "I hadn't thought about her in months." "What about it?" "Divorced again. Married some guy from her work 6 months after your divorce was final. Lasted about a year." I picked up the screws I'd come for and headed toward the checkout. "Don't you want to know what happened?" Marcus called after me. "Not really," and I meant it. Stephanie and her sisters eventually faced the consequences of their actions. Jessica lost her marketing job after her harassment of me created liability issues for her company. Vanessa's attempts to spread false stories about me backfired when mutual friends compared notes and realized she was lying. And Stephanie's quick remarriage and subsequent divorce damaged her reputation in our old social circle, leaving her increasingly isolated from the very people she tried to impress. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. They wanted to teach me independence? Well, they succeeded. I'm independent, I'm successful, and most importantly, I'm free. And all it cost me was a bus ticket and a broken heart that healed stronger than it was before.